Okay, let's get started. Welcome back from the exam. Hope that wasn't too unpleasant. My impression was obviously nobody finished before 12:15. I saw a few people who finished after 12:15. It seemed like most people were still working at the end, but I didn't see the sort of waves of panic and frustration and despair coming off of folks. So my impression is that most people by the end were working on the harder parts and hopefully not feeling too desperate about the exam. It's helpful for me to know if your experience of the, it's my intention that most people not finish an exam because that allows me to really get a good spread of scores. But I also know that if people are starting to feel panic during the exam, then it's not a good test of their performance because you're not supposed to do behavioral economics under conditions of panic. So your inability to do so should not be held against you. So please do let me know if this exam or the second one causes you to feel panic. Okay, so the next problem set has been posted. I'll set up a form for it after class. Your midterms will be returned in section this week. I think 2 of the 3 GSIs have already posted grades on Gradebook. Is that right? Or scores, rather. So the problem with that, of course, is that when a class is graded on a curve, which this and certainly every economics class I've ever heard of is, you don't know what your score means. And then because the grade distribution is determined within GSIs instead of across the whole class, it'll take me a little bit of time to come up with sort of a hypothetical, possible, suggested grade distribution and post the sort of mean, median, standard deviation for each GSI. But I will do that as soon as I possibly can, certainly within the next day or two. So don't panic at first. If typically my exams have a pretty low median, because that's the right way to do it. Okay, so are there any questions? And the solutions to the exam are posted. Are there any questions or comments about the exam before we move on? Okay, there we have it. So today we're going to start a new section of the course, which is all about time. So far we've talked about just sort of basic issues of reference dependence and the instantaneous utility function. We've seen how those issues and others can affect decisions that involve uncertainty, different possible states of the world. Now we're going to look at what happens when we introduce decisions that involve payoffs in different periods of time. And the thing we're going to care about most is when our decisions have both immediate payoffs and future payoffs, and in particular, when the immediate payoffs and the future payoffs are sort of opposite one another, so immediate benefits, delayed costs, or immediate costs, delayed benefits. Start out talking about why we should care about that, and then we'll go through our familiar process of looking at the standard model, seeing some of what it implies and how it fails, and then looking at a psychologically informed behavioral alternative. Now, this is going to be a little bit different than what we've done so far, because this standard model is one that you probably haven't seen as much. It isn't really central to the intermediate microsequence. You may have seen it a bit more. If you took 101A from Stefano Della Vigna, you will have come across it, and a lot of this will be review. But if you took 100A, you probably won't see it very much. So there'll be a little bit more heavy lifting on just hoisting in what the standard model is, and then we'll move forward in our usual way. Okay, so let me start by motivating the topic. Why should we care about intertemporal choice? Well, first of all, as with uncertainty, right? We crank up the theory of choice. Oh, I'm sorry, I need to make a comment about the handout. So our copier today is treating the top 3/4 of an inch of each page differently than it treats the rest of the page, and very unkindly. And there was nothing I could do about it. It was too late for me to try again, and anyway, it probably wasn't going to have been repaired. So my hope is that you'll all be able to fill in whatever is not super clear on the handout. I apologize for that. So on the one hand, just as with uncertainty, I mean, not all, but most of our choices do involve some degree of uncertainty, and most of our choices do involve some kind of intertemporal trade-offs. So in some sense, the thing that we teach you most about in 100A, which is a model of consumer choice with no uncertainty and no intertemporal trade-offs, it's not that interesting in a certain way. So we have to introduce these things and address them. But also there are big ticket implications when we introduce time, as there are with uncertainty. But I would argue that when we introduce intertemporal trade-offs into our model of consumer choice, we're actually dealing with economically more significant issues than when we introduce uncertainty. And certainly our standard model fails more catastrophically. Okay, so we'll be looking, to a large extent, we'll be focusing on these 2 kinds of choices that have immediate costs and delayed benefits, which we can sometimes think of as choices that involve some kind of investment, maybe literally a financial investment, maybe a human capital investment, that kind of thing. And then we'll be looking at sort of the opposite, immediate benefits with delayed costs, which we can sometimes think of as choices that involve some kind of temptation, right? Should I eat this donut and get diabetes later in my life or not? Okay, so here's some big ticket examples. Consumption versus savings, right? Consumption versus savings looks like, spend your money now versus spend it. Well, it is. It's spend your money now versus spend it later. So it's really consumption now versus consumption in the future. And in some sense, because of interest or return on investment, it's an immediate cost, delayed reward kind of issue. Now, this specific topic is actually very central to where neoclassical economics got its start, or classical economics, I should say. So you all know that sort of the starting date of what we think of as modern economics was the publishing of Adam Smith's Wealth of Nations in 1776. Among many other things, what he was getting at, and the reason that the book is titled The Wealth of Nations, was to try to understand why some nations are wealthy and others not. And so this is a macroeconomic question, and one of the big things that people have looked at historically is capital accumulation. So to the extent that developing national wealth requires that you have a capital stock, that you actually save money and invest it in machinery and factories and colleges and all the things that at the moment we're trying to decide whether or not to reinvest in as a nation, the ability to save as a nation, right, is important. Now, I don't know much about macroeconomics. I try to understand macroeconomics as little as possible because I know that if I understand it, people will ask me about it, and I want to have plausible deniability at the cocktail parties. I will tell you right now, one of the most important things you need to learn how to do is when somebody asks you a question about the economy or markets, is to be able to just look at them with a big smile on your face and say, I'm sorry, I'm not that kind of economist. And if you're lucky, they'll ask you what kind of economist you are, and if not, then you just get to move on to the next conversation. So I don't know much about macroeconomics, but I think I'm right in saying that it's not clear, in fact, whether capital accumulation is really the answer to why some nations are wealthy and some aren't. But Adam Smith, I'm pretty sure, thought that it was. And so then the question became, why do some countries accumulate capital successfully and why do others not? And what people looked at was this whole question of what is the psychology behind your willingness to trade off future payoffs against current payoffs, right? It's still an important issue, even within microeconomics, because it goes to whether or not people save for their retirement, And in a country, in a nation that has, to a first-order approximation, abandoned the idea of just letting people die early because they didn't save enough, we have social policies that address whether or not people save enough for retirement in order to be able to take care of themselves. We have the Social Security, the retirement component of Social Security. We obviously have Medicare. We have other things like VA benefits, veterans' health benefits, and pensions, and it's a big issue, right? In fact, it's one of the biggest facing our country at the moment. The other dimension, which I don't think Adam Smith paid any attention to at all, is behavioral health. Right? So you can think about a lot of behavioral health in terms of temptation, the donut example being a silly but important one. Or you can also think of a lot of behavioral health in terms of investment. Should I exercise now, immediate cost, for benefit later? Which is really just a sort of mirror image of the donut question. So you can see investment and temptation as really two sides of the same coin. Should I forego the temptation to not exercise is one way of thinking of it, right? Or should I make the investment of the immediate cost to exercise? It's really the same question. And to the extent that how you behave early in your life affects how much it costs to keep you alive later in your life, there are also huge impacts, again, within the Social Security system, part of which is disability, and then also Medicare, which is health benefits for the elderly, and Medicaid, which is health benefits for people at any age who can't afford health insurance, and I think mostly families. So again, I mean, these are, right now what's killing us as a country is that we can't agree on an appropriate balance of raising taxes and cutting these programs, and it's very obvious that even if we raise taxes, we would still have to cut these programs. So intelligent ways to do so are important, and understanding individuals' choices correctly is critical to getting these programs right, so that we can cut them without really hurting people badly. Okay, so matters a lot. Intertemporal choice matters a lot. All right, so the standard model. I'm going to try to wind this up in a way that's parallel to how I introduced the model of expected utility. We're going to think in terms of, remember, when I introduced expected utility, I said, look, the Hicksian model of one good against another good, it doesn't really fit very well when there's uncertainty because we don't really know what to call a good. So we need to think not in terms of preferences between one good and another, but preferences between gambles, or preferences over gambles. And then we define a gamble very clearly. In this case, we're going to, instead of gambles, we're going to talk about plans. And I'm going to use the word plan in a very specific way. I want you to be careful because we usually think about plans as plans of action. But what we're actually going to be thinking about when we use the term plan is sort of a time path of outcomes, some of which will be determined by your actions, some of which not. And it's the outcomes that people are going to have preferences over, and not specifically their actions. Okay, so a plan is any sequence of outcomes for an individual that unfolds over time, and the plan includes some definition of what's a time period. So it could be 1 day, it could be 1 year, it could be a week, it could be whatever you want. And then we'll denote those periods usually with a lowercase t. We'll typically start with the current period being 0. And that's usually because that helps out with writing down convenient summations, because when you have a discount factor, if you raise it to the power of 0, it turns into 1, and so that means no discounting in the immediate period. So we'll typically start with the immediate period being 0, and then we'll imagine that there's some horizon, cap t. When does this all end? And sometimes we'll think of cap t being infinity, usually only for mathematical convenience, because sometimes you can write down a sequence of outcomes more conveniently if it has no cap t, if you know about the convergence or non-convergence of infinite sequences. But that distinction usually doesn't matter very much. Okay. In each time period, there's some outcome that the individual experiences, which is could be how much they get to consume, it could be their health status, it could be a lot of things, right? And for simplicity, for the most part, for simplicity, initially, we'll focus on monetary outcomes, and we'll just, as we did with uncertainty, and we'll just call them x naught, x minus 2, all the way up to x cap t. But these outcomes could be anything at all. And in fact, for the most part, in this section of this class, we will keep things really simple and actually just specify the outcomes in util terms, right? So for example, we'll go through this thing on Thursday about when do you write a problem set versus when do you go to a movie. And rather than specifying some mysterious utility function over the consumption of movies and the work effort that goes into problem sets, I'm just going to say you get this many utils for the movie and this many utils from the problem set. Okay? Sorry, unless you guys are actually talking about the stuff I'm lecturing on, you to ask that you not chat. Thanks. Okay. So again, the outcome that you experience in the future is going to be determined sometimes by your current choices. Should I save a lot today so that I can have more money next week? And sometimes by your future choices. Regardless of what I save today, will I wind up spending a lot next week, leaving me with less money for the following week? So when we talk about a plan, it's a little bit tricky, and you have to sort of think carefully about what's really going on in some situations. Sometimes, if you're choosing between actions, right? The tricky thing in this field is that when you're choosing between gambles, you have preferences over gambles, and those preferences determine which gamble you choose. And then once you've made that choice, you're done, and the gamble you didn't choose goes away, and you get the gamble you did choose. In the case of a plan, okay, part of the plan, you're making a choice now. Should I save or not? Should I eat the donut or not? Should I go to school or not? Okay, but the entire plan that you're looking at may not be entirely determined by your current actions. So you might say, well, I prefer a plan in which I don't eat the donut today, and also I go to the gym next week, over a plan in which I eat the donut and don't go to the gym next week. But I'm actually not choosing between whether or not I'll go to the gym next week right now. I'm just choosing over whether or not to eat the donut. So the plan, don't eat the donut, go to the gym next week, may be preferred to the plan, eat the donut and don't go to the gym, but it may not actually happen that way. So we're going to wind up having to think very hard about how people's preferences over plans interact with their ability to execute the parts of the plan that still lie in the future. Okay? I'm just giving you I'm just foreshadowing what's going to wind up being overwhelmingly the trickiest part of this part of the class. Leaving all that aside, we can call a plan, let's say P, and we could notate it that way. It's simply the outcomes that you would get, regardless of whether they're determined by your current choices or your future choices. And then we can say, okay, setting aside the question of whether or not this plan will actually materialize, do you like it or not? Okay? Now, we have a similar kind of question about, yes? Yeah? Are you saying that choices at time t0 are independent from choices at time t1? They might not be independent at all. your choices at time 0 might actually determine what choice you get to make at time 1, right? If I sign up for a gym membership at time 0, then at time 1 I'm going to have a decision of whether or not to go. If I don't sign up for the membership, I'm not even going to have that choice to make it in the future. The choices I might make now might very well affect, if I decide to work out today, it might affect how I feel about working out next week, right? Whereas if I decide to eat an enormous, high fatty meal right now, it's going to change, right? So there's all of these things that affect where the present affects the future, and this is why this gets so murky. For my money, it gets a lot murkier than the stuff around uncertainty. Alice? Yes. Yeah. These are, so a plan is what will I actually get. Now, so let me just say, we're not going to worry about uncertainty for the most part in this part of the class. We're going to, for the most part, assume that you know in advance, if I make this choice and follow this plan of action, I'll get this outcome, this outcome, this outcome, this outcome. Yeah. Now, if I wanted to, I could make each of those different outcomes in the different periods a gamble, right? So if I invest now in period 1, my outcome will be a bunch of money goes away. But then in period 1, my outcome will be a gamble. Maybe the stock market will be high, maybe it'll be low, et cetera, et cetera. So we can introduce both time and uncertainty very easily into this setup. But it's just, as in most cases, when we're just trying to get at the basic insights, we just leave as much as possible out. Yeah. Was there another question? Yeah. Right, so Benjamin's question is whether we're going to bring loss aversion into this model. The answer is not in the lecture, but yes, it's addressed a little bit in the readings. It turns, so I mean, one of the things that we did when we looked at uncertainties is we said, well, it better be the case that what we found to be true about the instantaneous utility function when there was no uncertainty is still true when there is uncertainty. We want to do the same thing with time. We want to make sure that people's utility over these outcomes in the future is going to fit with what we think we know about the instantaneous utility function, and I'll address that a little bit, and it's addressed in the required reading a little bit more. It turns out that it's much harder to say anything really clear. There's loads of evidence to suggest that the instantaneous utility function in intertemporal settings is still reference dependent, but you have to be much more specific about what you think the shape of it is supposed to be, and it's annoying, and it was just more than I could fit into this section of the course. Yeah. Okay, so again, we have this question that bedeviled people for a long time, shockingly long time. How do you represent consumer preferences over plan? So let's say I asked you the silly question about would you rather go to Nepal and face the chance of being abducted by Maoists, or would you rather put your money in the stock market and face the risks that involves? So similarly, we could sort of look at, like, here's a choice. Should I quit school and spend all my time hitchhiking around the world and live in my kid's garage when I'm old, assuming that I'm successful in having kids? Or should I work hard now and live a life of thrift and then take luxury trips to Venice when I retire? How do I even think about harnessing the Hicksian model? Right? What would I even put here? I could try to dumb this down and just say, well, current consumption, future consumption. These are radically different kinds of consumption. So would I put down hitchhiking around the Southwest in dirty clothes as a youth, staying in luxury hotels in Venice as a retiree? How would I even do this? Right? So we need a better framework, and here's what we want. Here's what we got. I don't know if it's better or not, but here's what we got. You will find that both I and the authors of the first assigned reading are significantly less sympathetic to this piece of the standard model than to the expected utility model. The answer came in 1937. Paul Samuelson, who is one of the most influential and famous economists of the 20th century, came up with a model that has come to be known as the exponential discounting model, although in the assigned reading it is referred to as, there's an extra piece on your handout, right, that says AKA discounted utility model, or DU. Is that on your handout? Okay. So this is called discounted utility model, DU, in the reading, but that's a little awkward because our behavioral model is also going to be a model of discounted utility. It's just going to be a different kind of discounting. So we refer to this in behavioral economics as the exponential model. Okay. Oh, and I got that's not, you're not supposed to pay no attention to the stuff at the bottom of the screen. So the basic idea here is the consumer knows what their outcomes are going to be under any given plan, and they know that when they get to the future, they're going to evaluate their outcomes in each period according to some utility function, which we will once again call the instantaneous utility function, this little u. Okay? Just like with evaluating the outcomes, all the possible outcomes in different possible states of the world under the expected utility model. And then when they're looking ahead, they'll do this in 2 stages, right? Because we don't have the probabilities to fall back on as a convenient weighting. We have to come up with some way of weighting these different outcomes in different periods of the future. So the first thing that they're going to do is that they're going to discount, right? So they're going to get a number here for how much utility. How many euros will I get from this outcome tomorrow, this outcome the next day, this outcome the next day? And then they're going to take those utility numbers and they're going to discount them, okay, by some discount factor, d of t, right? So we're going to assume that people don't discount their immediate payoffs. And that they sort of take into full account the payoff, the immediate costs and benefits of a certain choice. But that when they think about the future, they know how many euros they'll get, but they care a little bit less about it because it's in the future. So they discount they multiply future euros by some number less than 1. And that number, I'm initially going to call d of t, because I'm going to kind of make this assumption, Samuelson certainly did, and we're going to preserve this, that how much you discount things by is just a function of how far away they are in the future. Okay, so we might think, for example, that if something is way out in the future, you really don't care about it that much. But if it's tomorrow, you might care about it a little bit less than today, but not as much as if it was 50 years from now. For lots and lots of reasons. Okay? And then they just sum up the discounted utility overall period. So the utility big U of a plan, right? Your preferences over plans are represented by this big U function, which is basically just the sum over all periods from 0 to capital T of the utility that you know that you'll get in each period, right? Given the consumption level in each period, then discounted by some discount factor that's a function of time. Okay? And then Samuelson made a very specific assumption about that discounting function, which is that it's an exponential function of time. So that d of t is just delta to the t, where delta is some number strictly between 0 and 1. Model doesn't work if it's either 0 or 1. Well, the model works mathematically, it doesn't make any sense. Okay. Let me be a little bit clearer.